Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was a hammer in the sky, and the desert did not forgive. Yates Varden pulled his gelding to a halt at the edge of a dry wash, squinting against the glare. He had been riding since dawn, checking fence lines and looking for a few strays that had wandered off after last week's storm. The land was nothing but cracked earth and stubborn scrub, but it was his. Hard-earned and quiet, the way he liked it. Then he saw her. At first, he thought she was a mirage, just heat playing tricks with his eyes. But no, she was real. A woman in a torn white dress, barefoot, her dark hair tangled and hanging around her face like a curtain. She was sitting on a rock in the dry wash, her skin gone red from the sun, her lips cracked. She looked like she had not had water in days. Yates swung down from the saddle fast. "Madam," he said, kneeling beside her. "You hear me?" Her head turned slow, eyes blinking up at him like she was trying to decide if he was real. "Water," she rasped. He pulled his canteen from the saddlebag and held it to her lips. She drank too fast, choking, but he steadied her with a hand to her back. "Easy, just a little at a time." Tears slipped down her dust-streaked cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "What the hell are you doing out here alone?" he asked, softer now. "Where's your people?" Her hands tightened around the canteen. "They left me." Yates frowned. "Who?" "My family. My new husband. All of them." He stared at her, trying to make sense of the words. "You were just married?" She nodded once, her voice shaking. "Yesterday. They said I was a burden." He looked at me like he didn't even know me. "They left me here before sun up and rode on." Yates looked at her torn dress, the mud on her hem, the broken-off heel of one shoe. He had seen a lot in his 33 years, but nothing like this. "You got a name?" She hesitated. Willara Grant." "All right, Willara," he said, rising to his feet. "You are coming with me." She flinched. "I not asking." He offered a hand. "You will die out here if you stay. I have a cabin 10 miles west. Food. Shade. You need rest. Come on." She stared at his hand a long moment before finally putting hers in it. Her palm was raw with blisters. He helped her up into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She was too weak to sit straight, so she leaned back against him, and he held the reins with one arm and steadied her with the other. They rode in silence, save for the wind and the creak of leather. When they reached the cabin, nestled between two red bluffs, the sun was already dipping low. He helped her down, carried her inside when she stumbled, and laid her on the cot. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Yates grabbed a clean cloth, dipped it in water, and gently wiped the dirt from her face. Her features were fine, with high cheekbones and a small, stubborn mouth. Her eyes, when open, had been a striking green-gray like sagebrush after rain. He sat beside her for a long time, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. She had been left to die? By her own kin. It turned his stomach. The next morning, he found her sitting up, wrapped in one of his blankets. Her hair was brushed and tied back, her eyes clearer. "I do not know how to thank you," she said quietly. "Do not need to," he replied, setting a bowl of oats and honey in front of her. "You eat that. Then we will figure things out." "Why did you help me?" she asked. "Because someone had to." She looked at him for a moment, like she was trying to see past the dust and the stubble and the worn flannel shirt. "You live out here alone?" "Yeah. No wife." He shook his head. "No." She looked down at the bowl. "I had no say in who I married. My father arranged it. Said it was for the good of the family." Yates leaned back in his chair. "And they just left you?" "They said I was too soft. That the man was promised a strong frontier wife, not someone raised in a boarding school." She gave a bitter laugh. "I was not even allowed to take my own trunk. They just rode off." He stood and crossed to the window, staring out at the endless stretch of desert. "Well, they were wrong about you." Willara blinked. "You do not even know me. I know you walked barefoot across the desert and lived." He turned back to her. "That is more grit than most folks I have met." She flushed, looking down at her hands. Over the next few days, she got stronger. She helped with the cooking, cleaned up the cabin, even fed the chickens out back. She asked questions about the land, the cattle, the way the well worked. Yates found himself talking more than he had in years, and he liked it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky copper, he found her outside, standing barefoot in the red dirt, her skirt catching on the wind. "You all right?" he asked. She turned toward him, her hair lifting off her shoulders. I feel like I can breathe here. He nodded. She looked at him. You saved my life. You would have done the same. She stepped closer. No one ever looked at me like I was worth saving before. Yates felt his chest pull tight. He had not meant for any of this to happen, but it had, and he did not want her to leave. You can stay, he said, as long as you want. Her eyes filled with tears. I want to. That night, they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. She leaned into his side, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. You are safe now. And for the first time since he was a boy, Yates Varden felt like maybe he was not alone anymore. The mornings came cool in late October, cold enough that breath hung in the air a few moments before disappearing. Willara rose early, the same as Yates, and pulled on the ruffle shawl she'd found folded in the bottom drawer of the cedar chest. It smelled faintly of juniper and old smoke. She wrapped it around her shoulders before stepping outside. Yates was already in the yard, hitching a young mule to the travois he'd built the afternoon before. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, forearms corded with work, his hat pulled low as he adjusted the harness. He didn't look up when she stepped onto the porch. You said the hilltop west of here had yucca, she said. His hand stilled on the strap. That's right. I'd like to go. If there's still some bloom left, I can make soap. My hands are raw from washing, and I'd rather not use your lye. He turned then, studying her. You know how to make soap? I was raised by an aunt for a time, she said. She was part Kiowa. Taught me what was useful. He gave a short nod. We'll ride. Take the mule in case we find anything worth bringing back. The journey to the rise took most of the morning. The trail wound between low ridges choked with catclaw and mesquite, the mule's hooves crunching over dry gravel. Willara rode behind Yates, her knees brushing the saddlebags, her fingers curled loosely around the pommel. She said little, watching the land unfold in long, quiet glances. At the top, the view opened wide. The basin stretched below, dotted with cholla and the occasional pinyon, the sky a deep, endless blue. She slid down from the saddle without waiting for his help and knelt beside a cluster of yucca, careful not to touch the sharp leaves. These'll do, she said. The pods are still tender. He crouched beside her. You really know what to do with all this? I remember the scent of the soap she made. Clean, earthy, not harsh like store-bought. She didn't waste anything. She hesitated. When she passed, they sent me back east. That part of my life. It got buried under lace in Latin. Yates looked at her closely, but didn't speak. She glanced up. I didn't think I'd ever use any of it again. You're using it now. That night, she boiled the roots down in a tin pot over the fire behind the cabin, stirring slowly with a stick until the water turned milky. Yates sat nearby, working a new leather strap for his saddle, his hands moving without looking. She poured the mixture into a small basin to cool. You ever had anyone here before me? No, not even someone passing through? A few traders stopped by in spring. One tried to sell me a broken rifle and a sack of weevilled beans. She smiled faintly. You didn't take it, I hope. I'm not a fool, Willara. She looked toward the basin. I don't know what to be here. I was raised to pour tea, not boil roots. But it feels more honest, doing this. You don't need to figure it out all at once. She nodded, then rose and wiped her hands on her skirt. I'll set this inside. When she returned, the light had faded to indigo and his eyes followed her. She sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, and for a long time, neither spoke. Then she said, You never asked me what I want. He set the leather aside. You don't owe me anything. I know, but I need to say it. He waited. I don't want to go back. Not to them, not to what I was. I want to make something new, even if it's small. He nodded once. You'll have it. She breathed out and looked to the stars. I think I was meant to be left behind. It hurt then, but now, I think it freed me. Yates leaned forward, his forearms braced on his knees. They threw away something they didn't understand. Doesn't mean it was worthless. The wind stirred the ashes in the fire pit. Above them, the sky stretched wide and cold. She looked at him, her voice quiet. You're not what I expected. He held her gaze. Neither are you. They didn't touch, not yet. But something passed between them, steady and sure, like the hush before dawn. Something growing, slow and rooted. In the distance, a coyote called, and neither of them flinched. The first frost came in the night, silvering the brush and curling the edge of every leaf. Willara woke before the sun, the chill sharp against her skin even beneath the quilt. Yates had already risen. She heard the soft thud of boots outside and the low creak of the barn door swinging open. She dressed quickly, pulling her sleeves over her hands. The stove still held some heat from the night before, so she added kindling and coaxed the fire back to life. Her fingers moved without thought, water into the kettle, flour and lard for biscuits. The rhythm steadied her. When Yates returned, he brought a bundle of sage branches and a quiet look. "Cattle need moving to the south pasture," he said, brushing frost from his cuffs. "That grass holds better through winter." She poured coffee into a tin mug and passed it to him. "I'll mend the fence line near the well after breakfast." One of the rails split clean through. He took the coffee, but his eyes stayed on her. "You sure?" "I am." He nodded once, and that was enough. By mid-morning, she was kneeling in the dirt, hammer in hand, sleeves tied back with twine. The sun had softened the cold, and a lone hawk circled above the ridge. She worked steadily, replacing the broken rail, tamping posts back into the hard-packed earth. Her hands were scraped raw by the end, but she didn't stop. When she stood, Yates was watching from the gate, his arms folded across his chest. "You didn't have to finish it all today," he said. "I wanted to. Seems right to fix what's mine to use." He stepped closer. "You don't act like someone who's waiting to be taken care of." "I never wanted to be." They walked back together, boots crunching over dry needles. At the porch, he hesitated. "Got something to show you," he said, jerking his chin toward the shed. Inside, he pulled back a canvas drape. Beneath it stood a loom, hand-built and worn smooth at the edges. "Was my mother's," he said. "She used to trade weavings for salt pork and calico. I never touched it after she passed." Willara stepped forward, running her fingers along the frame. "It's still solid. I figured maybe you'd want it. Or not. Just thought, I do," she said, voice low. "I haven't worked a loom since I was a girl, but I remember." He watched her a moment longer, then turned to reach for a crate in the corner. "There's wool in here. Some dyed, some not. Been sitting a long while, but it's clean." She crouched beside the crate, lifting out the skeins. Indigo, walnut brown, ochre. They smelled of cedar and dust. "I'll start with something simple," she said. "A rug for the cabin." He leaned against the doorframe. "Never thought I'd hear a loom working again. That sound always made me feel safe." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held something growing, rooted in shared space, and work done side by side. Later that week, she sat on the porch with the loom, the shuttle moving steady between her fingers. Yates returned from the pasture with a new tear in his sleeve and a fresh line of sunburn across his neck. He dropped his hat onto the step and sat beside her. "You've been quiet," he said. She didn't stop weaving. "I've been thinking. I want to stay through winter." He turned toward her fully. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. But I'd want to earn my place. Not just pass through. You've already done more than most who come through this land." She set the shuttle down and looked at him. "That's not what I'm asking." He held her gaze. "What are you asking, Willara?" "I want to make a life here. Not just with the land with you." Something flickered behind his eyes, but he didn't look away. "I've never asked a thing of you," she said. "Because I needed to know it wasn't just kindness. That it was choice." He reached for her hand, slowly, like he was afraid to break the moment. His fingers closed around hers, calloused and warm. "It's always been choice," he said. She nodded, her throat tight. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low. Outside, the wind stirred the last leaves from the cottonwoods. And between them, something solid began to take root, not born of rescue, but of two people who'd chosen to stay. By early November, the rhythm between them had settled into something unspoken but sure. The chores fell into quiet patterns, her tending to the loom or smoking venison strips on the rack behind the cabin, him riding the boundary lines and returning with his saddle creaking and his shirt wet with effort. They didn't speak of the future in grand terms, but they both acted as if it had already begun. One afternoon, Willara stood in the shade behind the cabin, rubbing beeswax into the new wool rug she'd finished. Her hands moved slowly, pressing the wax deep into the fibers, sealing it against the coming wet months. The scent of the wool mixed with the faint sweetness of the beeswax, grounding her. She heard his steps before she saw him, slow, deliberate, a faint limp in the left leg he never spoke of. He rounded the corner, a length of pine slung over one shoulder. "Fence up near the gully was down," he said. 2 posts snapped clean. "Might have been elk." She stood, brushing her palms on her skirt. That the last stretch needing mending? For now, though come snow, the cat'll test the wire again. He leaned the pine against the cabin and rubbed the back of his neck. She watched the motion, the way his fingers lingered a moment over the scar behind his ear. You ever get tired of patching the same things over and over? She asked. He looked at her, then down at his boots. I used to, before there was someone here to keep it standing for. She stepped closer, wiping a smear of wax from her wrist. You're not one for saying much you don't mean, are you? No, I like that. They stood in the soft hush of the afternoon, wind rustling the dried stalks of sunflower near the shed. Then she said, I want to build a root cellar. Before the ground freezes hard. He raised an eyebrow. You've thought that through? I have. Where? There's shade behind the chicken coop. That slope's firm. I can start digging tomorrow. I'll help. She hesitated. I want to do most of it myself. He studied her a long moment. All right. But if the roof caves, don't expect me to climb in after you without a rope. A smile ghosted her mouth. Noted. That evening, she brought out a small pouch she'd hidden in the bottom of her valise when she'd first arrived. Inside were 2 sewing needles, a thimble, and a scrap of blue silk embroidered with her initials. She'd kept it not for sentiment, but as proof she'd once been real to someone. Yates was carving a new yoke by firelight when she sat beside him. I want to ask you something, she said, and I'll take your answer plain. He nodded. If I were to suggest we marry quietly, just us and the land, would you think it foolish? He set the knife down. No, she watched the fire flicker across his face. I don't want a preacher who doesn't know us. I don't want papers drawn up by men who left me behind. I want something that's ours. Honest. I'd give you that. She swallowed, her voice steady. Then I'm asking. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ridge of her knuckles. We'll speak vows under the cottonwood. Come morning. She nodded once. There's no one else I'd want beside me when the wind turns hard, he added. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They sat with the fire between them, hands joined, and the air shifted around them like breath held too long finally let go. In the dark, the stars hung low and clear. And the promise made there, beneath the cottonwood's reaching limbs, was not of rescue or gratitude but of 2 people choosing to stay, not for what had passed, but for what they were yet to build. The vows were spoken just after dawn, while frost still clung to the wiregrass and the light filtered gold through the cottonwood branches. There was no need for spectacle. Willara had tied her hair back with a strip of woven wool, one hand resting in Yates's as they stood in the quiet hush between sky and earth. He carved 2 plain rings from elk bone, polished smooth and warm from his pocket. I will not leave, she told him, voice steady. Not in hardship, not when the season turns against us. I will wake beside you when the mornings are bitter and stand beside you when the days grow long. I will keep the roof strong, he said, and the fire lit. I'll listen when you speak, and I'll know your voice even in silence. They sealed it not with a kiss, but a shared breath, foreheads leaning together while the wind moved softly through the branches above. By mid-morning, the ground behind the chicken coop had been marked out in chalky lines, and Willara had begun driving her shovel into the hard-packed slope, breaking through root and stone. Yates joined her after bringing in the last of the cattle from the northern stretch. He didn't ask to take over. He simply dug alongside her, the rhythm falling into place without words. They paused once when she unearthed a rusted horseshoe buried deep beneath the clay, and she laughed softly, brushing the dirt from its curve. That's a good sign, she said. Or someone lost a bet digging this far out, he replied. By the 5th day, the root cellar stood framed and roofed with split cedar and packed earth. She lined the shelves with straw and clay pots, then hung bunches of dried sage and wild onion from the beams. When she stepped back to look at it, hands on her hips, Yates leaned against the doorway. It's sound, he said. It's mine, she replied. He touched her shoulder. It's ours. That night, with the last of the squash tucked safely inside and the door latched against the cold, she found him at the table repairing a worn bridle. She sat across from him, threading a needle through a tear in the cuff of his work shirt. Tell me something you've never said aloud, she said. He didn't look up. I never thought I'd grow old. Why not? I figured I'd die same way my brothers did. Fast, somewhere I couldn't bury myself. She set the needle down. But you didn't. No, I didn't. He looked at her then, the moment holding between them. And now, she asked. I want the years, he said. All of them. She reached across the table and took his hand. Then we'll have them. Through the weeks that followed, They moved like two parts of a joined body. She wove a blanket from the undyed wool he'd found in the shed's far corner, heavy and coarse but warm against the wind. He built her a second loom, smaller and easier to move, so she could work inside when the snow came. They didn't speak of the past. The life they were building didn't need it. On the first morning of snowfall, they stood outside, shoulders brushing, watching the flakes settle over the ridge and soften the sharp lines of the land. She turned to him and laid her cheek against his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat beneath his coat. "You hear that?" he asked. "What?" "Quiet," he said. "And it's not empty." She nodded. "It's full of us." That winter passed with little hardship. The cattle held, the roof never leaked, and their stores lasted through the worst of the cold. They read by lantern light when the wind howled, and he took to marking days with small carvings on the cabin doorframe, a pine tree for each week passed in peace. In spring, she planted beans and tobacco in neat rows, her fingers already knowing the work. He added a second chicken coop, and together they built a table long enough for more than two. One evening, as the sky turned violet behind the hills, she stepped out with a cup of cooled tea and found him sitting on the porch, whittling a toy horse from a block of ash. She watched a while before asking, "Who's that for?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Maybe someone who'll need it. Someday." She sat beside him, her hand resting lightly over her stomach. "It won't be just us forever," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it started with us. And it'll hold." They watched the last light fade, no fear in the quiet between them. Years later, the cabin still stood. The loom still hummed in the evenings, and the root cellar stayed cool even in August. A boy with his mother's eyes chased chickens near the coop, and a girl with her father's patience coaxed green from stubborn soil. Yates taught them both how to mend a saddle and split kindling proper, while Willara showed them how to listen for weather in the wind and weave strength into wool. The land didn't change quickly. It stayed wild at the edges and hard in the middle. But they'd made a space in it, a home not carved by force, but shaped by choosing. And each evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge and the day settled into hush, Yates and Willara sat side by side, hands joined, the silence between them full of all they'd built together. A life hard-earned and fully theirs.